recorded and ask that you please switch your phone to silent. Thank you. To begin, I'd like to invite Jack Buckskin to the stage to welcome us to Kaurna country. Jack is a proud Kaurna and Narungga man who has dedicated his life to renewing a once strong Aboriginal language and culture. Welcome, Jack.
Nah, Marnie, how are you? Very good. Firstly, welcome. Welcome to Adelaide. If you have travelled afar, I'm sure there's people that have travelled far to come to this. My name is Jack. I'm a proud Kaurna, Narungga and Wirango man, so I represent 3 Aboriginal groups from South Australia. I also acknowledge my dad, who's Italian and Scottish. It's got nothing to do with me standing up here. This is my mother's lands and country, but my Aboriginal name is Ganyapundunduit Binakudnuitcha. Nobody calls me that. Everybody calls me Jack, except for my mum. She calls me Vincent. Nobody else is allowed to call me Vincent, though. But welcome to Adelaide. Darndanya is a dreaming place of the big red kangaroo. It's an honour to represent our families and our communities in welcoming you in a protocol that's important for us when we gather in different spaces, different lands, to welcome you spiritually to this space. Darndanya is the dreaming place of the big red kangaroo. Darnda is the male red kangaroo that gave us all our law, our protocols and our processes to live in this country. And so when we welcome you, we're welcoming you into these ancient lands on behalf of people and ancestors that have gone before us, not just physically to the place of Adelaide. I come from Muniyarta, which is about 30 k's out of Adelaide here, around the Salisbury region, so I also acknowledge that I gather in a space that is not my family clan group, but as a representative of Kaurna people, we welcome you onto our lands. Munarangarlo wangarni marni ni burning arluku yarta ni to mini achartanga tikarding arluku ni pana nina kurda nanko nina karada nanko marni na burning arluku yarta na arluku bukya na mina mukubanga yachartara tikama arluku mina iya arluku ni pana. So just let our ancestors know that we all come as friends to this space and that we acknowledge them as we gather here. And when we talk about ancestors, it's not just ancient ancestors, it's people that are no longer with us in the physical world that have made you come to this space, that have made you do what you do in your own daily lives. They guide and they protect you. It's our duty as humans not just to focus on the physical, but also focus on the spiritual. The spirit affects both the mind and the body, so the significance of this is really to talk about the importance of us as human beings and be invited into this space. I'm going to play a bit of the Yiraki, the didgeridoo, and I acknowledge Yolngu for allowing me to play it down here on Kaurna country. So I do that in our mother tongue language, but also in Yolngu Mata, acknowledging them and thanking them for allowing me to play it down here. It is, I love this instrument for 2 reasons. One, it's the only instrument I know how to play. And 2, it's the best way to explain that us men can multitask when we want to. We just can't do the dishes and put the kettle on at the same time, but the didgeridoo, we're doing multiple things at once. So it is an honour to be able to play this. It's vibration, it's spirit as well. So it is an instrument that can really ground us and reflect on the place and people that have gone before us that are significant to our lives.
Thanks very much indeed, Jack. And a very warm welcome tonight to tonight's speaker, Mike Burgess AM, Director General of Security at Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, Her Excellency the Honourable Francis Adamson AC, Governor of South Australia, Mr Rod Bunton, Louise Miller-Frost MP, the member for Boothby, Cressida O'Hanlon MP, member for Dunstan, the Honourable Tammy Franks, MLC, State Member of the Legislative Council, Professor David Lloyd, Vice-Chancellor and President, the University of South Australia and current Co-Vice-Chancellor of Adelaide University. And at this stage, I'd normally welcome Ms Blanche Dalpaget, the widow of Bob Hawke. Unfortunately, Blanche is not well tonight and was unable to join us, but we know she's watching online, so all the very best to Blanche. To the Hawke Centre Advisory Board members and the Enterprise Leadership Team members from the Universities of South Australia, Adelaide and the new Adelaide University. Thank you all for joining us here tonight for the 26th Annual Hawke Lecture. This lecture is named in honour of former Prime Minister, the late Honourable Bob Hawke, a great South Australian and one of the nation's most significant leaders. As Prime Minister, Bob Hawke was a reformer and a unifier. He modernised Australia's economy, strengthened its social systems and helped position our nation within a global context. He understood that Australia's future depended on how we responded to change, not with fear, but with vision, fairness and resolve. The Hawke Centre was created in that spirit to encourage ideas, dialogue and leadership on the big issues that shape our world. Since its creation in 1997, the Hawke Centre has played an important role in our university's culture and community outreach. It will continue this important role as we move forward with the new Adelaide University. The Annual Hawke Lecture has provided a platform for influential voices to reflect on major issues shaping our society, from democracy and diplomacy to equity, innovation and national identity, just as Bob would have encouraged. Each year we invite someone whose perspective challenges us to think differently and whose experience speaks directly to the complex realities of our time. In that tradition, we are honoured to welcome tonight's speaker, Mike Burgess AM, Director General of Security and Head of the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, ASIO. Mike brings more than 3 decades of leadership in intelligence, cybersecurity and counter-terrorism. In a world where national security is no longer confined to borders and where digital threats can undermine democratic institutions, his work has never been more relevant. His career spans both the public and private sectors, including time as Director General of the Australian Signals Directorate and as Chief Information Security Officer at Telstra. In 2019, he was appointed as Director General of Security, leading ASIO during a period of rising complexity and shifting global threats. Throughout, he has brought a commitment to transparency, believing that the Australian public deserves to understand the work being done to keep them safe. Mike is also one of our own, raised in Adelaide and a graduate of the South Australian Institute of Technology, an antecedent institution of the university. He is a proud UniSA alumnus. The first in his family to attend university, Mike embodies the transformative power of education and the importance of using that education in service of the greater good. His lecture tonight will offer an unfiltered look at the threats facing Australia, not only from a strategic or political lens, but in terms of how they affect the values and way of life that we all share. With deep insight, humility and clarity, Mike will help us better understand the role intelligence plays in shaping a resilient and secure future for our nation. We are extremely fortunate to have Mike Burgess here this evening, and we are very grateful to him for joining us. I'm sure that you're looking forward, as I am, to hearing from him this evening. I now invite Mike Burgess AM, Director General of Security, ASIO, to the stage, and please join me in giving him a very warm welcome.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Jack. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land in which we meet today, the Kaurna people, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to acknowledge Her Excellency, the Honourable Francis Adamson, Governor of South Australia, and other dignitaries. Thank you to the Chancellor, the Honourable John Hill, Vice-Chancellor Professor David Lloyd, and thank you to the Hawke Centre and the University of South Australia for inviting me to address the 26th Annual Hawke Lecture. As an alumni, I am chuffed to be here. I still remember my first lecture. My lecturer said there were 74 people in the course, but only 1 in 4 of you would be here at the end. I was determined to be one of those 4. Now, 40 years later, I know, right? I'm clearly not as old as I look, or older than I look, whichever goes. I can't believe that I had to count that many times on my hands. 40 years later, I stand here as the 14th Director General of Security, delivering the Annual Hawke Lecture at my university. I never expected that. So it's great to be here, and good evening, everyone. In preparation for tonight's address, I've been looking at past lectures, including the reflections on Bob Hawke made last year by Foreign Minister Penny Wong. Minister Wong remarked that while Bob Hawke was a famously good talker, he was probably an even better listener. I can safely say ASIO are excellent listeners, perhaps the best in the country. Bob Hawke knew ASIO well. ASIO knew Bob Hawke well. But as I'll explain, you shouldn't read too much into that. The relationship between the Prime Minister and Australia's Security Service was founded on and largely defined by concerns about espionage. At ASIO, we describe espionage as the theft of Australian information by another country that is seeking advantage over Australia. The key point here is that it's the involvement of a nation state as opposed to criminals or companies stealing purely for themselves. For as long as nation states have existed, they have sought to understand the intentions and capabilities of other states. All nations spy, all nations seek secrets, all nations pursue strategic advantage. But that does not mean we can ignore, tolerate or accept the theft of Australian information. Quite the opposite. It's a reminder we need to uplift our awareness, strengthen our defences and build our resilience. So this evening, I will reveal how ASIO counts and counters the cost of espionage. For the first time, I will put a dollar figure on what espionage costs our economy and reveal the significant future impacts if we do not take security more seriously. This is critical because I believe that we as a nation need to wake up to the cost of espionage, which is more than just financial. We need to understand espionage is not some quaint romantic fiction. It's a real, present and costly danger, just as Bob Hawke recognised in extraordinary circumstances 42 years ago. On the 8th of March 1983, 3 days after being swept into power, Bob Hawke welcomed a visitor to Kirribilli House, ASIO Director General Harvey Barnett. It was the same day President Ronald Reagan called the Soviet Union an evil empire, a time of acute great power competition and escalating Cold War tension. Barnett spent an hour and a half briefing the Prime Minister-elect on ASIO, its targets and the evolving security environment. Reading the official record of the conversation, I'm struck the Director General felt the need to assure Hawke ASIO operated legally and ethically and did not use what he called dirty tricks. Clearly, the wounds from the raids by Australia's Attorney General a decade earlier were not fully healed. The DG stressed that ASIO did not target MPs or trade unions and volunteered that ASIO copped criticism from the left and right of politics. It's something I can certainly relate to. But prompting Hawke to suggest that ASIO must be doing its job correctly in the centre. Of course, with all due respect to the former Prime Minister, we would call that being apolitical. Of course, despite the assurances about politicians and unions, Bob Hawke was already well known to Australia's security service. Not because of any concerns about Hawke himself, but because of some of the people a prominent union leader met with. As Hawke himself later acknowledged, and I quote, "I had no doubt that ASIO had its fingers in lots of pies that were on the shelves around me." It's a rather sticky thing, ASIO officers. What the Prime Minister-elect didn't know at the time, that ASIO had previously taken a prudent decision to change the code word it used for telephone intercepts. It started using the term bugle, replacing the old and completely coincidental code word hawk. Thank goodness we changed it. Of course, the main purpose of the first meeting was to brief the Prime Minister on the threat environment. At that time, espionage was Australia's principal security concern, and Russia was the principal espionage threat. Barnett told Hawke KGB intelligence officers were active in Australia, targeting MPs on both sides of politics. This turned out to be a very prescient warning. Just 6 weeks after the initial meeting, the two men met again under much less convivial circumstances. Barnett travelled to Parliament House to deliver the news that Soviet diplomat and suspected KGB operative Valery Ivanov was attempting to cultivate Labor lobbyist and former ALP National Secretary David Coombe. ASIO had suspected for several years that Ivanov was a KGB intelligence officer. Multiple conversations between the Russian and Coombe were recorded, including one in which Ivanov suggested their relationship should be secret. As I know from experience, no politician smiles when an ASIO Director General walks into the room. Barnett's revelations hit Hawke and his government hard, but the Prime Minister took decisive action. Within 2 days, Ivanov was declared persona non grata and given 1 week to leave the country. Government members were forbidden from dealing with Coombe. But what should have been an operational victory for ASIO quickly turned into a media frenzy and a political crisis that ultimately resulted in the resignation of a Cabinet Minister, Mick Young, and a Royal Commission with a sitting Prime Minister, a feisty and effective witness. The scandal was a wake-up call, driving home to Hawke that espionage was a real threat and jolting the nation out of any complacency about whether the sort of spy scandal seen overseas could happen here. As Hawke later told ASIO, and I quote, "There was no question in my mind that we had to be tough, decisive and immediate in our response. Any pussyfooting around could have been seen as soft on the threat of Soviet espionage. I knew it was a sort of make or break situation. And if we didn't handle that properly, we would have been a one-term government." Despite the claims of his critics, including David Coombe, the PM handled the crisis properly and went on to win 3 more elections. Fast forward to the present, and espionage remains one of Australia's principal security concerns. A new iteration of great power competition is driving a relentless hunger for strategic advantage and an insatiable appetite for inside information. Russia remains a persistent and aggressive espionage threat. Last year, 2 Russian-born Australian citizens were arrested and charged with an espionage-related offence. Separately, I can confirm in 2022 a number of undeclared Russian intelligence officers were removed from this country. The decision followed a lengthy ASIO investigation that found the Russians recruiting proxies and agents to obtain sensitive information and employing sophisticated tradecraft to disguise their activities. But Russia is by no means the only country we have to deal with. You would be genuinely shocked by the number and names of countries trying to steal our secrets. The obvious candidates are very active. I've previously named China, Russia and Iran, but many other countries are also targeting anyone and anything that could give them strategic or tactical advantage, including sensitive but unclassified information. These countries want to covertly comprehend our political decision-making and policy priorities, including our alliances and partnerships, and particularly AUKUS, to steal Australia's intellectual property and cutting-edge research, to recruit to their own cause Australia's elected officials, public servants, members of our military, industry leaders, academics and leaders in our community, to obtain personal details of individuals with access to sensitive information so they can be targeted for potential recruitment, obtain information about perceived critics of regimes so they can be monitored, intimidated and silenced, to map out Australian critical infrastructure for potential sabotage if regional tensions boil over, and to understand and undermine Australia's military modernisation and identify vulnerabilities in our defence capabilities. Increasingly, foreign intelligence services are broadening their collection requirements beyond these traditional categories, aggressively targeting science and technology, particularly advanced technology that has both civilian and military applications, public and private sector projects, negotiations and investments that might give foreign companies a commercial advantage. And this includes Antarctic research, green technology, critical minerals, rare earths extraction and processing. Academics, business people and journalists are all potential targets of foreign spies seeking these insights. In the current environment, nobody with sensitive information is immune. Foreign intelligence services can obtain this material in person, convincing, coercing or seducing insiders to impart sensitive information, and through technology, most commonly by hacking. Often it's a combination of both, where cyber espionage enables in-person espionage and in-person espionage begets cyber espionage. Espionage can be small scale and it can be industrial scale. Spies can be opportunistic and spies can be patient, masquerading as diplomats, journalists, academics, business people and other professions to conduct sophisticated multi-year campaigns. ASIO has detected and disrupted countless examples of all these things. 24 major espionage and foreign interference disruptions in the last 3 years alone, more than the previous 8 years combined. And they are just the major disruptions. There have been many other cases. Spies have successfully recruited a security clearance holder who handed over an official documents on free trade negotiations. Foreign companies connected to intelligence services have sought to buy access to sensitive personal data, sought to buy land near sensitive military sites, and sought to collaborate with researchers developing sensitive technology. Foreign intelligence services tried to get an asset employed as a researcher at a media outlet with the aim of shaping its reporting and receiving early warning of critical stories. Spies convinced a state bureaucrat to log into a database to obtain the names and addresses of individuals considered dissidents by a foreign regime. Nation-state hackers compromised the network of a peak industry body, stealing sensitive information about exports and foreign investment. In another case, they hacked into the systems of a law firm involved in a sensitive government litigation. A foreign intelligence service directed multiple agents and their family members to apply for Australian government jobs, including the national security community, to get access to classified information. A visiting academic with the links to the foreign government broke into a restricted tech lab and filmed its contents. ASIO investigated all these plots. Some of them may yet result in police charges, so I won't go into further detail here, but they are just the tip of an espionage iceberg. Nation-states are spying at unprecedented levels and with unprecedented sophistication. ASIO is seeing more Australians targeted more aggressively than ever before, more than when Bob Hawke was in office, more than the height of the Cold War, and more than when another Labor Prime Minister, Ben Chifley, founded ASIO in response to American and British concerns about Soviet spying. This threat will not diminish anytime soon because the dynamics driving it will only intensify. In particular, we are seeing foreign intelligence services taking a very unhealthy interest in AUKUS and its associated capabilities. Australia's defence sector is a top intelligence collection priority for foreign governments seeking to blunt our operational edge, gain insights into our operational readiness and tactics, and better understand our allies' capabilities. Targets include maritime and aviation-related military capabilities, but also innovations with both commercial and military applications. And with AUKUS, we are not just defending our own sovereign capability, we are defending critical capabilities shared by and with our partners. Foreign intelligence services are proactive, creative and opportunistic in their targeting of current and former defence employees, relentless cyber espionage, in-person targeting and technical collection. In recent years, for example, defence employees travelling overseas have been subject to covert room searches, been approached at conferences by spies in disguise, and given gifts containing surveillance devices. Defence is alert to these threats and works closely with ASIO to counter them. Foreign intelligence services already consider Australia a difficult operating environment, and I'm determined ASIO will continue to play its part to make it even less hospitable. We will help defend AUKUS to ensure it is delivered without compromise. The Commonwealth Government is well attuned to espionage challenge, not just in defence, but more broadly. It fully backs ASIO as Australia's spy catchers. But I'm still not sure we, as a nation, truly understand the damage espionage inflicts on our security, democracy, sovereignty, economy and social fabric. As Harvey Barnett wrote in his memoir after retiring as ASIO's Director General, with the simple self-confidence which living in an island state breeds, Australians are sometimes doubtful that their country might be of interest to foreign intelligence services. It can't really happen here is a stock attitude. It has, it does, it will. Now, just to be clear, at this stage at least, I harbour no intention of writing a memoir. But I do understand why Barnett felt the need to defend ASIO from unfair criticism, and I believe his assessment of Australia's complacency remains relevant today. In 2025, it is time for another Hawke awakening. We need all parts of our system, public and private, federal, state and local, to recognise the threat and invest in stopping espionage, just as our adversaries invest in conducting espionage. I'm not simply talking about financial investments. I'm referring to broader prioritisation of time, focus and effort. I'm talking about taking security seriously. I've lost count of the number of times senior officials and executives have privately downplayed the impacts of espionage. I've watched corporate leaders literally shrug their shoulders when they're told their networks are compromised. I've heard sensible security measures as taking a burner phone to high-risk countries described as unreasonable inconveniences. I've been assured stolen academic research would have been published anyway. I've been asked why won't the government itself pay for security? Most recently, a trade official told ASIO there's no way Chinese intelligence services would have any interest in their organisation's people and premises in China. All too often, we make it all too easy. On just one professional networking site, the profiles of more than 35,000 Australians indicate they have access to sensitive and potentially classified information. About 7,000 reference their work in the defence sector, including the specific project they're working on, the team they're working in, and the critical technologies they're working with. Close to 400 explicitly say they work on AUKUS, and that figure rises well above 2,000 if you include broader references to submarines and nuclear. Nearly 2,500 publicly boast about having a security clearance, and 1,300 claim, believe it or not, to work in the national security community. While these numbers have fallen since I first raised the alarm 2 years ago, this still makes my head spin. Surely these individuals of all people should understand the threat and recognise the risk. Now, I get that people need to market themselves, but telling social media you hold a security clearance or work on a highly classified project is more than naive. It is recklessly inviting the attention of a foreign intelligence service. Employers are not the only ones recruiting online. Spies from multiple countries routinely and relentlessly trawl professional networking sites, seeking to identify, target and cultivate Australians with access to privileged information. These spies pose as consultants, headhunters, local government officials, academics and think tank researchers claiming to be from fictional companies. Most commonly, they offer their targets consulting opportunities, promising thousands of dollars for reports on Australian trade, politics, economics, foreign policy, defence and security. Additional payments can be offered for what's called inside or non-public information. If a target takes the bait, the spies usually try to move the conversation onto an encrypted messaging app. A further step might involve the offer of an overseas trip to meet in person. This form of espionage is low cost, low risk, low effort and conducted at scale. Hundreds of friend requests can be sent each day. Thousands of Australian students, academics, politicians, business people, researchers, law enforcement officials and public servants at all levels of government have been targeted for espionage in this way. The vast majority resist, report or ignore the approaches. Unfortunately though, some are sucked in and end up being used recklessly or consciously to gather information for a foreign country. In one example, a foreign intelligence service used a professional networking site to identify an Australian with access to security clearance holders. The spies cultivated the individual over an extended period, offering payment in exchange for written reports. At first, the requested topics were general in nature, broad insights into bilateral relations and Australia's strategic policy directions. But over time, the request turned into demands, the topics became more specific, and the sort of information required grew more sensitive, such as Australia's intelligence priorities. Fortunately, ASIO intervened before the Australian handed over anything of consequence. It is fair to assume that even when a person is not aware they're being used for espionage, the consequences can still be serious. They can lose their job, and if they have one, their security clearance. More recently, a particularly aggressive and creative intelligence service expanded the sort of operation to employment sites. It started creating fake online job ads advertising well-paid part-time roles for people with expertise in geopolitics and defence. In one typical case, an overseas consultancy firm advertised for freelance analyst roles on a popular employment website. It promised to pay $500 American for reports on international politics. An Australian sent in a CV and quickly received a return email requesting information on AUKUS and the Indo-Pacific. The firm said it was particularly interested in exclusive information and requested the applicant share the names of his AUKUS-related professional contacts. Fortunately, the applicant became suspicious and reported the engagement to ASIO. Our investigation revealed the consultancy was a cover company for a foreign intelligence service. This more passive job ad approach seems less suspicious than an unsolicited friend request, but the same warning signs apply. If an offer seems too good to be true, it probably is. If you are pressed for confidential information, be discreet. If an approach seems unusual or persistent, report it. Wake up to the cost of espionage. These cases are reminders that espionage is real. Anyone with access to privileged information can be a target, and this sort of corrupting behaviour imposes tangible costs. Espionage takes away sovereign Australian choices and options. It corrodes our decision-making. It damages our economy, and espionage can result in the loss of revenue, loss of intellectual property, the loss of reputation, and in the case of defence capabilities, loss of war-fighting advantage. Espionage undermines significant Australian investment by taxpayers and private capital in research and development, in innovation and in new technologies. Espionage enables sabotage, foreign interference and more espionage. Espionage is 1,000 different effects that chips away at the base of our prosperity. In an attempt to calculate the true cost of espionage, ASIO partnered with the Australian Institute of Criminology. The cost of espionage report we are releasing today is believed to be the first and certainly the most comprehensive public analysis of its kind in the world. The modellers use the same relatively narrow description of espionage as ASIO does, covering only information stolen for or by a foreign government. They were given access to some of our classified material, including relevant ASIO investigations, and they gathered further insights and examples from other agencies, industry groups, university think tanks and other key stakeholders. And I'd like to thank everyone for their involvement in this important and timely project. The Institute is well practiced and credentialed in this sort of modelling. but even its experts found the exercise extremely challenging. By definition, espionage is highly secretive and therefore difficult to measure. But they did an excellent job, and its work will provide it and other researchers a baseline for future refinement. The bottom line is all about the bottom line. Espionage cost the Australian economy $12.5 billion in 23-24. $12.5 billion. This includes the direct costs of known espionage incidents, such as state-sponsored theft of intellectual property, as well as the indirect costs of countering and responding. As just one example, the Institute estimates foreign spies stole nearly $2 billion of trade secrets and intellectual property from Australian companies and businesses in 23-24. The report includes a case study where spies hacked into the computer network of a major Australian exporter, making off with commercially sensitive information. That theft gave the foreign country a significant advantage in a subsequent contract negotiations, costing Australia hundreds of millions of dollars. ASIO investigated similar cases and others involving in-person espionage. Several years ago, a delegation from overseas visited a sensitive Australian horticultural facility. During an official tour of the site, a member of the delegation broke away, entered a restricted lab, and photographed a rare and valuable variety of fruit tree. An alert staff member discovered and deleted the images. But it emerged photos weren't the only thing taken that day. Several of the tree's branches were missing. The delegate had snapped them off and smuggled them out of Australia. Almost certainly, the stolen plant material allowed scientists in the other country to reverse engineer and replicate 2 decades of Australian research and development. In another case, an Australian defence contractor invented, manufactured and marketed a world-leading innovation. Sales boomed for a while, but suddenly collapsed for no apparent reason. Customers began flooding the company's repair centre with faulty products. While the returns looked genuine, closer examination revealed they were cheap and nasty knockoffs. An investigation uncovered what happened. 1 year earlier, a company representative attended a defence industry event overseas and was approached by an enthusiastic local. She insisted on sharing some content via USB, and that was inserted into a company laptop. The USB infected that system with malware, allowing hackers to steal the blueprints for that product. Almost certainly, the enthusiastic local worked for a foreign intelligence service. The blueprints were given to a state-owned enterprise which mass-produced the product, the knockoffs, and deprived the Australian company millions of dollars in lost revenue, the tangible cost of espionage. More recently, an Australian company developed an expensive and highly sophisticated military capability, only for another country to unveil a prototype with unmistakable similarities shortly afterwards. While I cannot categorically say espionage was involved, spy chiefs do not believe in coincidences. We know an intelligence service from the other country tried to cultivate relationships with the company's employees, and ASIO identified more than 100 individuals on LinkedIn saying they worked on that project, with others posting specifications and functionality on open discussion forums. All of that created a cumulative and comprehensive set of information, people and opportunities for foreign powers to target and exploit. Increasingly, ASIO is seeing nation-states using even more sophistication and difficult to detect methods to illicitly obtain valuable information. Just last year, an Australian tech company went into voluntary administration after one of its investors made a series of decisions that made no commercial sense. These included selling the company's intellectual property, which had commercial and military applications, to a foreign corporation on terms highly unfavourable to the Australian company. ASIO has yet to confirm if a nation-state or foreign service was directed behind this activity, but we're aware of similar cases where sensitive information about a company's vulnerabilities, such as its cybersecurity settings, were passed to a hostile intelligence service by an insider. These examples all add up. In the cost of espionage report, they add up to more than $12 billion. $12.5 billion in 1 year. $12.5 billion is an imposing figure, but the report stresses it significantly underestimates the true cost of espionage. Many entities do not know their secrets have been stolen, or do not realise they've been stolen by espionage, or do not report the theft. The Institute deliberately chose to be conservative, only modelling costs it could confirm and calculate. That means many of the most serious, significant and cascading costs of espionage are not included in the $12.5 billion figure. The potential loss of strategic advantage, sovereign decision-making and warfighting capability hold immense value, but not a quantifiable dollar value. The Institute report contains more than 12.5 billion reasons why we need to take security more seriously. Now, having said that, I'm an optimist, somewhat unusual for a spy boss, I know, so I also want to highlight a more reassuring section of this report. Our current investments in countering espionage are delivering dividends. The Institute estimates Australia prevented tens of billions of dollars of additional costs by stopping or deterring spying. You could call this ASIO's return on investment, but that would diminish the work of the wider public and private sectors. I applaud and thank those people and organisations who manage their security risks effectively, just as Bob Hawke did. The scenarios the Institute modelled are foreseeable acts of espionage are eye-opening and eye-watering. The theft of trade secrets from a large publicly listed company could wipe $900 million from its share price, with that figure compounding fivefold if there was another compromise in just 1 year. A cyber espionage attack on a similar sized company could result in a loss of $500 million in share market value. The espionage-enabled sabotage of critical infrastructure could cost the economy more than $1 billion, with that figure ballooning to $6 billion if the disruption lasted just 1 week. These events did not happen in 23-24, so they're not included in the $12.5 billion figure, but the report notes they are realistic possibilities in the future, and they will become even more realistic and even more possible if we do not continue to counter espionage and harden our defences. As the Institute states in the report, the costs are preventable only if applicable appropriate action is taken to address the threat from those who seek to harm Australia's national interest. Clearly, espionage imposes measurable, meaningful costs on the Australian governments, businesses, universities and other entities. Australia is defending itself against some espionage, but more needs to be done. ASIO estimates the threat from espionage will only intensify. It is already more serious and sophisticated than ever before, so our response must also be more serious and sophisticated than ever before. Security is a shared responsibility, and in the prevailing threat environment, national security truly is national security. It's everybody's business. We all have a role to play. ASIO is not all-seeing and all-knowing, and we don't want to be. We cannot catch every spy. We need your help. And as I mentioned earlier, all parts of our system, public and private, federal, state and local, need to recognise the threat from espionage and invest in countering it. If you have sensitive information, common sense is a good place to start. Be alert to the threat. Don't make yourself a target on social media. Don't use password as a password. Update your software. Follow the rules for handling sensitive or classified information. If you're pressed for inside information, be discreet. If an approach seems suspicious, report it. If you work for the government or have a security clearance, you are obliged to report suspicious approaches. The easiest way is to get in touch with your security manager and fill in a contact report. Anyone else can call the National Security Hotline or use ASIO's reporting portal at nitro.asio.gov.au. Of course, common sense only gets you so far. Governments, businesses and organisations have a responsibility to establish and maintain robust security measures and to foster a strong security culture. As the tens of billions of dollars in prevented espionage costs suggests, many Australian entities are already doing this and doing it successfully. They know much more about what's required for their particular circumstances than I do. But having said that, given the scale of the threat, we can always do better and do more. CEOs and boards frequently ask me what good security looks like. ASIO is your security service, but we're not your security manager. But there are simple steps that you can take. In my opinion, an effective defence against potential espionage shares a lot of DNA with the effective defence against other foreseeable organisational challenges like criminal theft, fraud, workplace accidents and equipment failures. Understand the threat, identify the risk and manage the risk. In the context of espionage, understanding the threat means acknowledging the threat is real, anyone with sensitive information can be a target, and the consequences for your bottom line, your reputation and the national interest can be severe. Identifying the risk means knowing what is valuable and what is vulnerable in your organisation, whether that be data, assets or people. Managing the risk involves a coherent, connected security strategy across your whole enterprise, your people, places, technology and information. Building a high-tech fence isn't much help if you use password as a password, and great cybersecurity isn't much help if you can't control access to your premises. The people piece, though, is often overlooked. Firstly, I'm not suggesting managers need to conduct mass surveillance on their staff, but they do need to continuously educate them and stay alert to anomalous behaviour. If an organisation rarely reports security incidents or rarely disciplines anyone for security lapses, I suspect it's got poor security settings, not strong ones. Simple steps can make a major difference. The vast majority of compromises involve a known vulnerability with a known fix. It just wasn't addressed. And when we are dealing or identify an individual with a security problem, almost always the person's manager says they're shocked but not surprised. The signs were there, but again, the vulnerability wasn't addressed. So good security is achievable and good security works. Businesses and organisations don't need to be spy catchers. That's ASIO's job, but they can make, at the very least, spying more difficult. I think the other key message, and this might sound surprising given the security environment I've described this evening, is act but don't overreact. The last thing Bob Hawke would want is for the fear of espionage to undermine our precious social cohesion by curtailing community engagement or stoking division. I note the values over there of the Hawke Lecture. Were this to happen, it would perversely have the same corrosive impacts as espionage itself. Don't assume every diplomat is a spy. Every friend request is suspicious. Every community group is connected to an intelligence service, or every foreign investment application is a potential problem. They're not. So what does this mean in practice? Given who is hosting tonight, I'll use an example from higher education. Now, I'm not suggesting universities should halt all joint research projects with overseas institutions. Far from it. But universities do need to understand the threat. Some foreign intelligence services use academic collaborations as cover. With that in mind, universities can identify the value and vulnerabilities of a particular project and consider how to manage that risk appropriately. In many cases, that means collaborating with care, alert to the threat, eyes wide open, and the national interest in mind and sensible safeguards in place. In some cases, though, a much more cautious approach will be required, particularly if the research is sensitive, and there will be examples or situations where the mitigation is impossible or the collaboration is definitely not in our national interests. As I mentioned earlier, common sense is a good place to start, and simple steps can make a major difference. The espionage threat is serious but not insurmountable. The people conducting espionage are sophisticated but not unstoppable. We cannot be defeatist or insecure about our security. We can and should have confidence in our ability to respond. After the passage of Australia's world-leading espionage and foreign interference laws, we saw several foreign intelligence services pausing, reconsidering and recalibrating their activities in Australia. The same thing occurred after the first charges were laid. I'm sometimes asked, if there's so much espionage, why aren't there more prosecutions? Before I get to that, I do want to acknowledge Chrissy Barrett, Deputy Commissioner for the Australian Federal Police, who's joining us tonight, a great partner the AFP are in us dealing with this, and they're the ones who arrest people, not ASIO, because we can't arrest anyone. That is their job. 3 people are currently before the courts on espionage-related charges, and I'm confident there could be more if anyone tries to compromise AUKUS. But not every case of espionage can be prosecuted, particularly if the perpetrators are offshore. In many circumstances, other tools such as visa cancellations or a knock on the door from your friendly security service can be far more effective and efficient than lengthy, costly prosecutions. For our part, ASIO is working with our partners to aggressively utilise every available tool. We are quite literally getting in our targets' faces, confronting them here and overseas. We are sharpening our responses, expanding our capabilities and hiring new people. So forgive me for the shameless recruitment pitch, because right now we are recruiting intelligence officers, many of whom will work on the front line of countering espionage operations. So if you're a problem solver and a team player, please consider the Intelligence Development Program. Details are on our website. You join a great team, I'll keep going, to protect Australia and Australians from threats to security, including the threats I've detailed tonight. ASIO's people make a real difference. In every one of tonight's case studies, we detected the deception. In many of the instances, we were able to stop any harm being done. In all of them, we worked with the victims to raise awareness, harden defences and build resilience, turning a threat into a positive. I hope, with the benefit of distance and hindsight, we can think of the Coombe-Ivanhoe affair in a similar way. While the scandal rocked the government, upended careers and damaged reputations, it also led to a national awakening and a series of reforms that remain consequential today. The subsequent Royal Commission made a number of transformative recommendations that were implemented by Bob Hawke's government. First among them, the establishment of the Inspector General of Intelligence and Security as an independent and powerful oversight body. Hawke later told ASIO, in comments not previously made public, that he was proud of his legacy and in this regards, and I quote, "It was a very, very cloudy 20th of April 1983 when Harvey came and told me about the Coombe-Ivanhoe affair, and there was a very cloudy picture for some weeks after that. But out of that cloud did come the silver lining. We got down to dealing with the issue and recognising the importance of the role ASIO should have and the context, the framework within which it should operate. So I think you could say that out of something very, very hurtful and personally hurtful came something which has been extraordinarily positive and enduring. The reforms Bob Hawke introduced back then are still paying rich dividends today. ASIO is Australia's spy catcher and we're busier than ever before. Our mission remains critical and our commitment to it remains steadfast. If you're spying in this country, ASIO is looking for you. And if you're being spied on in this country, ASIO is looking out for you. And while we can and should keep counting the costs of espionage, the value of countering it is priceless. Thank you.
I was worried I was going to get taken out by somebody as I came across the stage there. My name is David Lloyd. I'm the Vice-Chancellor and President of the University of South Australia, Co-Vice-Chancellor of the new Adelaide University, and it is my honour to deliver tonight's vote of thanks to Mike. Thank you, Director General, for your address this evening, for giving us such a compelling and thought-provoking insight into the current security threats which face Australia. It's not often that we get such access to the thinking and leadership behind our national security. And tonight you've offered us not just information, but a better understanding of what's at stake and how we as a society should respond. The Ivanov Coombe affair shook the early years of the Hawke government, and it shaped its relationship with ASIO. The scandal served as an important wake-up call for Australia that espionage presented a real and current threat to our nation's security. It is therefore appropriate and exciting that Mike chose to use the Annual Hawke Lecture to unveil the Australian Institute of Criminology's The Cost of Espionage report. Quite likely, this is the very first public analysis of its kind in the world, and I'm sure that you, like me, found some of its calculations that the Director General shared with us tonight to be both sobering and eye-opening. I'm particularly keen to read the section of the report that focuses on the costs to Australia's university sector. The DG said, espionage remains one of Australia's principal security concerns. Espionage can result in the loss of revenue, trade secrets, reputation, sovereignty, and in the case of defence capabilities, war-fighting advantage. While the report found espionage imposes significant costs on the Australian economy, many of the most serious, significant and cascading costs of espionage are not quantifiable and are not included. Potential loss of strategic advantage, sovereign decision-making and warfighting capacity hold immense value, but not a concrete dollar value. In fact, these things are really priceless. The Director General also gave us amazing insights into the insidious nature of espionage, including a staggering number of real-world case studies. The reference to a visiting academic caught my attention for some obvious reasons, but I was similarly shocked by the incident involving a rare fruit tree. More shocking still is that this is just the tip of an espionage iceberg. In his address, Mike noted that people rarely smile when the DG of security walks into the room. I know that when my phone rings and his name comes up, I sometimes shudder. While I'm sure that this is the case in general, so much of Mike's work involves delivering bad news. I was also struck very much by the optimistic and positive messages that he delivered tonight. And I'll quote Mike here. The espionage threat is serious, but not insurmountable. The people conducting espionage are sophisticated, but not unstoppable. He also detailed how Australia's efforts to counter espionage are delivering tangible outcomes. Thank you, Mike, for giving us all some sage and actionable advice on how we can do more in that space. Don't use password as your password. I, for one, will also reflect on whether our new university's strategic and security settings and security culture are fit for purpose in the prevailing threat environment. Good security works. Act, don't overreact. I understand that ASIO will release a range of additional materials to supplement tonight's address, including advice on how governments, individuals, businesses and the higher education sector can defend against espionage and build their resilience. Mike, we all do look forward to a memoir in due course. Keep being a good listener. Thank you again, Mike, for sharing your insights with us this evening. It's been a pleasure and an honour to have you with us. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I would also like to thank the Hawke Centre's Executive Director, Jacinta Thompson, and her team for bringing us this event tonight. It takes a lot of work to bring something so wonderful to the stage, so let's acknowledge that team as well. As the Chancellor pointed out, tonight's lecture has been recorded. It's ironic, but it will also be up on the Hawke Centre's website very soon. Please do feel free to share that link with others. Thank you all for joining us here tonight. Have a safe trip home, and we look forward to seeing you at another future Hawke Centre event. Good night.